So let's begin where we left off. We were discussing the issue of sicha kishtia, a yeshivish expression, which actually came up in our discussions because we were talking about the case of the fellow who applied chelev shor haniskal to his makkah. It means fat. Usually chelev refers to forbidden fat. We're going to see that, and as we saw before, it's sometimes not the case. Chelev shor haniskal is an ox that is condemned to death. Why is the ox condemned to death by stoning, by the way? Because someone committed a terrible sin with that ox, or that ox actually itself committed a sin. Yeah, oxen could be put on trial. There's actually a drasha about that. So the issue came up that there is this concept. It's mentioned a few times in the Gemara that rubbing something on one's skin, anointing, that would be the sicha. Samich yud kaf hey would be forbidden if the substance is a forbidden substance. Usually the way it's understood is if I can't consume this substance, I shouldn't be smearing it on my skin either. Okay. So let's see what the story is with that. In which cases does that hold true? In which cases is that not true? Which cases is actually subject of dispute? So let's get to the beginning. What's the first explicit case of such a thing? Well, it's a Mishnah on Shabbos. Shabbos is early in the Talmud, and it's in the 9th parak in the 4th Mishnah. It asks that, how do you know that shtia, sicha is like shtia? That's what it literally means. Sicha, anointing, is like drinking. It should be shithia, drinking. How do you know that anointing oneself with oil on Yom Kippur is like drinking on Yom Kippur? That is forbidden, like on Yom Kippur. And the Mishnah continues and says there's no proof, but there is an allusion. You're not going to find, by proof, you're not going to find a verse that says, thou shalt not rub oil on thyself on Yom Kippur. It says just afflict your souls. So what's affliction? Normally the usual understanding of affliction is fasting, refraining from eating and drinking, and Chazal have other allusions they found. They say zecher, an allusion. It says that with the Russia, the klala kimado, he put on a klala, and he's wearing it like his uniform. And what happens? It shall go into his innards like water. The kirbo kamayin, the chashemen basmuthau, and like oil into his bones. And on that Mishnah, the Rambam explains that unlike with regards to eating and drinking on Yom Kippur, anointing with oil on Yom Kippur is not punished with kareth. One who is to violate Yom Kippur either by doing forbidden labor or eating and drinking is to be punished with kareth, but is just as forbidden. And it's still punished with lashes. He says, you still lash him for doing such a thing, even though there's no Isur kareth here. And he later explains, and the odd to be rabbinic lashes. That is, it's not the lashes prescribed for violating a biblical commandment. It's the lashes prescribed by the sages for violating one of their commands. It's called Makath Marduth or Malkuth Marduth. In this case, he says Makoth. He doesn't say Malkuth or Lokeh. He says Makoth. It means whatever the Beis Din has decided for is the appropriate penalty for his violating this rabbinic enactment. Or not necessarily rabbinic enactment, but for violating what the sages told us is forbidden and they couldn't explicitly find in the Torah. In Yoma, there's a few dafs about this from like 73 to 76. They also derive from Daniel's actions. He afflicted himself by not anointing himself. It says, V'sach v'sachti, he wouldn't eat. He was doing a few days of penance, and he was praying. And he continues and says, I didn't anoint myself. And once again, this is Daniel itself is a late book of the Bible. This is after destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the first one that is. So the fact that Daniel says he doesn't do it, or he didn't do this, as means of afflicting himself, still is not explicit in the Torah. So perhaps we have here some sort of rabbinic innovation. Next source is Nida 32a. And that's talking about Truma. And it says that anointing with Truma oil is considered like eating the Truma. Okay? Some people are supposed to eat Truma, and some people are not. If you are not the Kohen, or his children, or his wife, or his slaves, then you should not be eating the Truma. You should not be consuming the Truma, even if it's impure. If the Truma has been made impure, so the Kohen can use it as fuel, or feed it to the animals, whatever it may be. But it's only for the Kohen to use. So if one were to take, let's say, the olive oil, usually that's the only one that we see here. That's the only thing they were squeezing into oil. So you take the olive oil that's truma, and you put it on yourself. So that, and you weren't supposed to. So now you'd have to make restitution. It's considered a sin if you're a non-Kohen, a czar, as it says. And if a person were a Kohen, or one of the aforementioned people who are associated with the Kohen, so it would be permissible to do so. It would be sort of a mitzvah. What does it say? Lo yichalalu. They shall not desecrate the Kodesh, the holy foods of the Israelites, asher yorimu la'Hashem, that they raise for the Lord. The harim is the old verb for setting aside truma. Later, they just created a new verb, like Rambam says, using that new shorish. It used to be the shorish was resh vav mem, and now the shorish is tough resh mem, with Rome, which is modern Hebrew word to donate. And sometimes it's lahafrish. That's the bracha. I guess the more accurate, not lithrom trumoth or liharim trumoth. It's lahafrish. And there's a gra that says, when you recite the blessing on performing certain commandments, you should try to keep your language closest to that of the biblical language. So it's a good kasha here. It says, you should have lehaniach tefillin. I don't know. It doesn't say lehaniach. Likshor, lasin. What about sitting in the sukkah? It says leshev. It should be lesheveth, perhaps. Whatever's closest to the biblical. It says, for example, chala, lafrish chala min ha'isa. And there's a whole discussion there because it's called chala. Okay? Chala tarimu truma. So why is the verb lafrish? Why not liharim? The Vilna Gaon was looking at the noun, the object, the subject. Sorry, the object of this blessing, but we weren't discussing the actual verb used. Okay, good question over there. So I would think that give a good argument, it should be laharim, and lahafrish is just the sage's word. At least home. That'd be really difficult. This verse also includes one who anoints and drinks. Actually, it's a chilu figure, so it's there. La'aviyeth ha sicha hasach kashotheh, or ones who anoints and ones who drinks. Hasach v'hashotheh. Okay, it's either way. It means that this verse is teaching that drinking and anointing with the truma, anointing with the truma, or drinking, let's say the wine from the truma, would result in a prohibition if a person was not supposed to be consuming truma. So we discovered that with regards to truma, once again, sicha is like shtia, and also on Yom Kippur. In the halachas of truma, the Rambam's own work, in the 10th parak, he writes, Echad ha'ochel masha darko le'achel, whether he eats what is meant to be eaten, or someone drinks what is meant to be drunk, or one who anoints with that which should be applied to one's skin, he violates the prohibition of consuming truma, assuming he is someone who should not be consuming the truma. So once again, the Rambam there seems to say that this is a rabbinic prohibition. And just to know that usually, once again, olive oil was the only thing that they really had from truma that was considered darko, that it should be made into oil and used for anointing. There's most other things that from which they take truma, they don't use to produce oil. Maybe persimmons, shemen afarsimon, that might be something. Other types of oil that somehow you can create from fruit, but stuff that comes from trees or from minerals, it's barely it's a big machlokes. To what extent do we really have to take, let's say, truma from certain vegetables also? So usually it's talking about oil, and oil is meant to be used. Everything else, if you say that I turn my pomegranates into oil, kal v'chomer, you shouldn't be, like we said before, you shouldn't be turning your pomegranates even into juice. So you shouldn't be turning your pomegranates into oil if you could. So it's usually talking about olive oil. Okay, so the Rabbeinu Tam is quite important because usually that which Rabbeinu Tam said usually becomes the practice for a while. Based on our Gemara, what Gemara we seeing? We were talking about Psachim, the Gemara here, the 24th page, second side, that's 24b, says that the biblical prohibition of Sicha Kishtia is specifically on Yom Kippur or regarding Truma and Isurei Hana'ah. We were talking about there's a difference between Isurei Hana'ah, that which not only can't you eat it, you can't get any benefit from that. And it's usually considered that the Isur Hana'ah is you can't use this material, let's say the orla, the kila karim, the combination of milk and meat, you can't sell it, for example, get some other secondary benefit that doesn't involve eating. Okay? And he says you can't anoint with an Isser Hana. If you were to somehow have forbidden olive oil that somehow became forbidden for Hana'ah, if you could imagine such a thing, so you couldn't have Sicha Kishti with that. It was worshipped as idols. It's a Tikrovis or something like that. So only in those three cases, if it's Yom Kippur, when you shouldn't be putting olive oil on your skin, or it's olive oil of Truma, or somehow became a Isser is there a prohibition of Sicha Kishthia, and therefore there's no everyday prohibition to use, let's say, chelev, forbidden fat, on one's skin, because forbidden only to be eaten and is not an Isser Malacha. Chelev, we saw, is not, Isser Hana. Forbidden fat comes from animals, that's true. And it's an Isser Karis to eat it, but it is not an Isser Hana'ah. So the fellow who has a slaughterhouse, his business is slaughtering behemoths, or just he's splurging. He's making a wedding for his son, so he's going to shech the bull in order to feed all his wedding guests. There's going to be a certain amount of chelev that is a product of that. And Chazal say he can recoup the loss, so he can use the chelev for some sort of purpose. He could sell the chelev, for example. He could render it into candles. He is getting a benefit from that chelev. So it's not an Isser Hana. And therefore, Rabbeinu Tam says, he's actually pretty parsimonious in this case. He's saying the prohibition of Sicha Kishtia is only in these cases that we mentioned. It's only a prohibition on Yom Kippur to anoint oneself. It's only prohibited to use Truma oil to anoint oneself. And Isser Hana, a form of Hana would be to anoint oneself with these prohibited substances. So only in such a case. But with regards to Chelev, I guess I could somehow, if there was a way to put Chelev on one's skin, so that would be pretty much permissible. What was the case that you learned this from? The case that we said right there in the Gemara. It was the forbidden fat of a condemned ox that was forbidden to be put on the makkah. Okay, it says the chelev from a shor haniskal you shouldn't put on the makkah, and it says it is basically patur from any punishment, implying that it's before the fact forbidden to do so. And it seems to be because that chelev isn't Isser Hana. The shor haniskal, everything about that shor, that ox, is an Isser Hana. I can't get any benefit from this ox. It is to be killed, and that's it. No one can't sell the carcass even for leather or even for dog meat. It's gone. Complete loss. So that's why you mentioned the chelev from a forbidden ox you can't use on your makkah, right? To teach that is an Asur Bana, that should not be applied to the skin for the makkah, for example. And the implication is that stam, forbidden fat, chelev, could have been used the chachila on one's skin. That's the implication of that teaching. Now, parenthetically, let's say that we saw, for example, according to the way the Rambam understood the sugya, he read it entirely differently, that there was the ox that was forbidden and an Isser Hana, but the word chelev meant any of its fat. It wasn't, when it said that, it meant chelev more generally, saying, it took tallow, stearic fat from that animal for whatever reason, and one used it on his makkah, okay? And the B'tur was because such was not done derech hana, okay? It didn't mean forbidden fat, it just meant something that came from the shor niskol, which is inherently forbidden b'hana, and he has a B'tur because there is no derech hana that you could use animal fat like that on a makkah. It must be some sort of refuah, okay? It's an attempted refuah, which we saw earlier, sometimes the opposite. What do we say refuah was? Refuah meant, in most cases, an attempted refuah means not just medicinal purposes, but also preventative purposes or therapeutic purposes. And this is beyond the scope of what we're dealing with now, but we mentioned this before. Refuah is used by Chazal and the poskim to mean all of those particular types of cases. Okay, so there's an attempted refuah here, like Rashi says, putting the chelev on the makkah is not derech hana, unlike what Rabbeinu Tam is implying here. There's no hana. You're supposed to use chelev for, let's say, treating skins, right? Animal skins, processing leather, or some other purpose. Using it, rendering the fat once again for other purposes, but not for topical application. So there you see that they disagree with the way Rabbeinu Tam fundamentally understands this case. And we also said that this case is not brought lahalacha. Okay? It's rejected by what we learn the daf later. Okay, two amudim later. So, but Rabbeinu Tam actually is using this teaching. He's going all the way with it. He's using it la'alacha, and he's actually deriving something with it. And if you look in Orach Chaim 326, which is the laws of Shabbos, the Ramah, like the Vilna Gaon says, apparently rules like Rabbeinu Tam, that it is forbidden to use rendered chelev, okay, apparently forbidden fat on the Sabbath, because of the malacha aspect. Chelev nimoach, it says. It's melted, rendered. But the implication is that, this is the Vilna Gaon talking, that on a weekday, such would be permissible. Where the Ramah learned this from Rabbeinu Tam. If you had some rendered chelev from any animal, you could technically put it on your skin on a weekday, using it for, hana. Okay, and there's no isser hana on this thing because it's chelev. Chelev is not inherently an isser hana. But the Vilna Gaon adds devar of dechukin. Okay, dechuk. It's not really the way to understand the sugya. And the Vilna Gaon says something that's profound here. He says, "Di'im kain biyom kippurim ein asur ela shemen davka." If Rabbeinu Tam were correct in his understanding, then in Yom Kippur, the only prohibition of anointing oneself would be with oil. And by the way, stam oil, olive oil. Why? The Vilna Gaon, let's explain what the Vilna Gaon is saying here. Olive oil is the only thing one could use as a ta'anug on Yom Kippur. Right? Ta'anug is pleasurable. The way the Vilna Gaon and, let's say, the Rambam understand this, applying something else on one's skin that's not the usual oils that you're supposed to put on your skin, like olive oil, is not pleasurable. Everything else would be considered some sort of refuah. Once again, medicinal, therapeutic, preventative. And what would happen? Which is the opposite of hana. Okay, doing something medicinal, therapeutic, or preventative is the opposite of hana. Okay, it's a different category altogether. That is, according to Rabbeinu Tam, hana is of anointing is forbidden on Yom Kippur, but not other types. So the Rabbeinu Tam would say, but if you're doing this for some therapeutic purpose, it would be okay. But the problem is, all forms of anointing are forbidden Yom Kippur, okay? Unless there is a sakana. I'll read you what the Rambam says. Asur lasuch mitzat gufo kechol gufo. On Yom Kippur, it's forbidden to anoint oneself on just part of the body, the finger or the hand, just like his whole body. Doesn't matter what part he does. Bein sicha shel ta'anug, bein sicha she'ena shel ta'anug, whether it's for pleasurable purposes or not. Okay, it's not for pleasurable purposes. But if he's not well, he's sick. Afal pishin bo sakana. Okay, now the guy's a chole, so there's no danger. Oshish lo chatatim barosh. There's some sort of lesions on his head, the scalp there. Then that person could anoint himself in Yom Kippur. Okay, so in this case, I said it wrong. It's not some form of sakana. It's some sort of actual medical need. That's the proper way to say it. An actual medical need. Okay, not a sakana. So we'll change that around. Make a note to myself. Don't say that wrong next time. Okay, medical need. Okay. The Mordechai put it this way. The Vilna Gaon says, look in the Mordechai. It's on Shabbos. I forget the exact symbol. I think it's Shin Lamed Ches, Shlach. Okay. You put it that the heter for using oil on Yom Kippur is for some sort of refuah, otherwise it would be usher. So too for chelev on weekdays. The heter would be for refuah, but if it's not some sort of refuah, it is forbidden. Okay. The Rabbeinu Tam did not understand it that way. So that's basically the argument. The Chafetz Chaim mentions that the Ramah holds like the Rabbeinu Tam with the general leniency that if you have some sort of substance that's, let's say, inherently not kosher, they can make, I don't know, an ointment out of pig fat. So pig is forbidden. Pig is not Isser Anah. So pig doesn't fall into the category of Yom Kippur. It's not Yom Kippur, and it's not Truma, and it's not Isser Anah. And even though you couldn't eat this, imagine they made some sort of pig ointment that was technically still edible, just like you can't eat it, you would be able to apply it to your skin, according to Rabbeinu Tam. That's the Ramah's heter. And according to the Vilna Gaon, like the Chafetz Chaim points out, and the Mordechai and others, you can't do that. Just like you can't eat this substance, you cannot be applying it to your skin. Okay, even on a weekday, it doesn't matter. That's the way they understand the sugya. Now, consideration is denaturing. We saw the Rambam said once you take these forbidden substances and there's no hana in its consumption, So you can do refuah with it even in a case of not sakon. There's no danger. You can use it for therapeutic, medicinal, preventative purposes. So the classic case is taking the pork, the forbidden substance, even the Isser Hana, and turning it into some sort of unpalatable form. They say the pill, dehydrating this thing into a medicinal form, some sort of unpalatable powder, and coating it with enteric or whatever you pronounce that, and swallowing it. So you can use that for refuah. There's no hana involved. You don't get hana, so there's no prohibition of eating this thing. So too, with regards to, let's say, chalev. If you were to have denatured chalev, such that I could eat it, like the Rambam gives a few examples, you could consume forbidden food in denatured state. So if it was also denatured, no hana from the consumption, so maybe I could use it for refuah lechatchila, according to, let's say, the Vilna Gaon. So I could denature the forbidden fat, and that would allow me to use it for sicha kishtia, according to even the machmir opinions. Okay, a consideration. I've seen this. That's indeed what they say. With regards to lanolin does come from sheep, but it's not from their kishkas. Lanolin is, according to the usual kashrus organizations, saying they get from the wool. Okay, it's an oil that naturally comes from the wool, and they say that ever comes out of the animals. With regards to animal secretions and things that come off the animals, those are kosher even without shechita. What's the example? Eggs. Eggs from chickens are kosher. Oh, they came off a chicken; they're not considered basar, and I don't have to shech the chicken in order to eat the eggs. Or milk from mammals, chalav behema. So I could take the milk from that, and that's kosher. But the eggs and milk from non-kosher animals are non-kosher. So if you have lanolin from kosher animals, technically speaking, it would be kosher, and therefore you could put lanolin into all sorts of creams and stuff, even according to the machmir, and use it on the skin. But let's say sheep fat that came from a non-kosher sheep, it wasn't processed in the kosher manner, was shechted by the wrong person, it was in vela, treifa, whatever it might be, and somehow they're using actual sheep fat in this ointment, and it is still in a consumable form technically. At least it's, it doesn't taste any bad, and it's not harmful. Maybe the baby might accidentally eat it, whatever it might be. So one maybe should not be putting on skin. There are those people who are machmir, like the Chafetz Chaim and the Vilna Gaon, for these cases. And if you don't know what to do, ask your local Orthodox machmir, as they used to say.